Eberechi Eze, it's a little bit simpler. The clause is on the cusp of expiring. £60 million, 8 million in add-ons. Arsenal have never intended to trigger the clause, so whether it expires or not is kind of irrelevant. And they've let Crystal Palace know that in their club-to-club talks. Those club-to-club talks are only initial. Eze in the 10 role is Arsenal's top target. My expectation is a bid is placed and it falls below the clause, and likely after the clause has expired. And then we wait and see whether Crystal Palace's stance is pay or match the clause or walk away. From Arsenal's point of view, they've got player buy-in. They know that Eze wants the move, and they see him as a 10, not a left winger. And because you have Ethan Nwaneri, who can play centrally, because you've got Noni Madueke and Eze that can both move over to the left-hand side, and because you've got Leandro Trossard and Gabriel Martinelli on that left-hand side, and they're quite versatile players as well, a few things need to fall into place here. Some at Arsenal say they want an outgoing, and then they'll place their bid for Eze. Others say they'll finance Eze, and then they'll worry about the chemistry and the outgoings after it. With Martinelli, they'd rather keep the player. With Trossard, they're engaged in contract renewal talks. But I think, as we've said on previous shows, Terry, the extremes are there again, where you can simultaneously hold positive talks with these players and then still sell one of Martinelli or Trossard at the right price. And that's where I think we're at, that Trossard or Martinelli, more likely, I think Trossard at this stage could still be sold. And then Eze can still come in at a number 10, and maybe Arsenal don't strengthen on the left-hand side in addition to the 10, because they know that Eze can go there. They know that Madueke can go there. They know that one or both, depending on what happens of Martinelli and Trossard, so they're well covered. So my expectation is probably just a number 10, with Eze being the top target and less likely to sign a specialist left winger, because otherwise you're stifling the game time of Madueke. And if you need, Eze can obviously move there. Odegaard can play in that role through the centre. Rice can play in a more advanced position. Havertz can play behind the striker. So I think when you add all of that up, it feels like the last attack-minded reinforcement for Arsenal will be a 10. And this notion of a Rodrigo and Anthony Gordon seems to be less likely at this stage.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense in relation to that. And I just wanted to say as well, just in not in your defense, because you don't need it, but in relation to the sort of sitting on the fence thing when it comes to transfers, this is just a lot of old nonsense when it comes to what people like yourself do, because you're talking to, and I'm never going to ask you even privately, and we've spoken privately, and I wouldn't ask. You have your sources, agents, people at clubs, etc., etc., and there is this thing of, I know you wouldn't just print what anyone says without getting confirmation elsewhere, speaking to the other side. You do proper journalistic work, but your job isn't to talk to a football club, for instance. Let's just create a hypothetical. Like Ben's job isn't to speak to a sporting director of a football club, speak to the agent of the player, and they both say, yeah, we've been told Liverpool right now are not going to make a bid unless Newcastle show some want to negotiate. Ben just prints an article saying, been told this, but that's all bollocks. All that's going to end up leading to is Ben not being told anything more by that football club. And then there are people in the comments going, yeah, but well, Ben knows just as much as we do. That's just bullshit, isn't it? That's just absolute bullshit. So, of course, it's as a fan, I've read everything you've said today, everyone. My fan opinion as a football fan is this is still well and truly on. I still think this is going to happen. But I also understand that Liverpool right now, this is what they're saying. And it's important that the journalists give us the right information that's coming out of the football clubs and not just their opinions. I think the world, by and large, has become a bit of a worse place since journalists give their opinions more than the facts of the matter. And it's very, very important that we get that from journalists rather than just their view or opinion or, oh, I'm annoyed at the situation, I'm going to write something that isn't true. That would be a crazy thing to do. There should be a distinction between what fans say and do and what the professional journalists do, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, but also there's this assumption somehow that what we're publishing is a particular side or a particular view or a particular source. And actually,
have you seen Scotty from Geordie Shore? He's been calling all of you guys out for 2 or 3 days.
But the thing is that these kind of stories, believe it or not, you publish a tweet, obviously, and before that, we'd written something for TalkSport, and I've been on air all day, as has chief football correspondent for TalkSport, Alex Crook. So you might read the tweet, or more likely the aggregation, that doesn't give the full context of our article or what we've said on air or places like this. But there's this assumption somehow that we just put it out of nowhere. And for me to get to that exclusive, it was about 4 hours worth of straight calls in which I was told they bid 100, they bid 110, they bid 120. They were preparing a second bid. They weren't preparing a second bid. They were confident. They were not confident. Newcastle shut the door. Newcastle opened the door. That Isak was pushing for the move, that Isak was going to sign a new deal, that Liverpool were definitively out, that they might be out, that they weren't out. And then once again, that they were preparing a second bid, all from different people and even conflicts between sources in and around the same club. So when you then publish, not only do you have to go back to each source because you've put scrutiny on what they've said, but finally you have to align with the wording that you're comfortable with. And it's not the case that every single person I've spoken today, even people that are in and around the room or in the room, it's not the case that everybody that I've spoken to today is happy with my wording, is happy with my piece, agrees with my piece. Because as a journalist, your job is not to call up someone at a club, take what they say as verbatim and put it out there because they want the message out there. And I think if we'd have done that today, the story would read differently on both sides. So my read from sources is that the Liverpool position today that they don't plan to bid is genuine, but not placing a bid again today, tomorrow, the next day versus pulling out are very different things. So I don't think this saga is over either, but I do think that as of today, Liverpool's position is genuine, that they're not currently preparing a second bid. And for them to prepare a second bid, Newcastle United would have to call them up and offer some direct encouragement.
Yeah.
And the good news is if they do that, the deal is going to happen very quickly. If they don't do that, the deal will not happen at all.
Makes perfect sense to me. In regards to Chelsea, a few updates today from across the continent that Xavi, as he likes to be called, as you told us last time, is closing in on a move to Chelsea. Is that your same understanding that that deal is fairly close?
I think there's a bit of a gulf in valuation, but there's no doubt the player wants the move to Chelsea. Broad personal terms are in place. I said yesterday that I think both players will leave Leipzig, but I think the first to leave Leipzig, that club's going to get a better deal than the second. In other words, if Xavi Simons is done quickly, you might get it for 70 million or under. If Šeško gets done before it, I think Leipzig will dig in on their valuation and vice versa. So it's not really to say either exit is in doubt, because I don't think they are. I just think one club out of Newcastle, Man U for Šeško, or Chelsea for Xavi Simons, or anyone else that may enter that race, your Bayern, your Arsenal, whatever, I think whichever club moves fast will get that Leipzig reduction because they need the money, because they have no European football. And then I think whichever clubs are left for the other player will find negotiations a bit harder and a bit slower, even though I think both eventually will exit the club. So Chelsea are optimistic. People are saying, why have they not put in the formal bid? And I explained this yesterday, that when you have a good relationship with a club, you go verbal to try and agree a package. So then when you've put in your formal bid, you feel like it's just a formality. And you sometimes do that out of secrecy, because if you show a formal bid, it tends to get out there. And then when it's out there, every other club sees the valuation. And what if you placed a formal bid and it was close, or it got accepted and it was only 60 million for Xavi Simons? Then you might find Bayern or Arsenal go, oh, okay, that's what they're starting at. We want in. They've done all the legwork for us.
Yep.
Now we're going to come and hijack that. So secrecy is usually easier to maintain in verbal talks that both parties can deny, whereas you often can't hide a formal bid. And this is why I think Chelsea are trying to work discreetly at a lower number than people realize to get it as close as possible without showing their hand.
Which again, I think makes a lot of sense to to the vast majority of us, it really does. There's a few comments here. First one says, Isak should tell Newcastle to accept the next bid or he will buy himself out of his contract, which he can do under the FIFA rules. I've seen a lot of people speak about this, these FIFA rules in the last 3 years of your contract. They can just buy themselves out. Is that a plausible option as far as you've been informed?
No, I don't think we'll see a situation where Isak buys himself out. I think we'll see a situation where there's two extremes, like I said before. One is Newcastle will make a ploy now because it's a good window for Newcastle. They can test the player's position and say, come back. And then they can always try and make him a new contract offer and say he can still leave in a year's time. And if he genuinely thinks he's got an out in a year, you never know. And if the player rejects that approach, I don't think you're in a position where he needs to buy himself out. If Isak just went on strike now, said, I'm never coming back, don't care if I'm in breach of my contract, I'm staying at Real Sociedad, I'm unavailable for selection for the first games of the Premier League season. And that's what makes this so complicated, because you haven't just got deadline day, September the 3rd, you've got a week before the Premier League season. And there's no way Eddie Howe is going to want to be speaking every week about where's Isak, why is he not training? Is he available or isn't he available for selection? There's no way Newcastle will want the player to make a statement like, remember, Moises Caicedo did in that January where he nearly moved to Arsenal, because that just adds fuel to the fire. So I don't think we'll see a situation where he has to buy himself out of a contract or anything like that. I think the player's got the biggest decision to make now. Does he think that Newcastle's stance is as genuine as Liverpool do right now? And does he return? And if he returns, then I think within Newcastle, they will take significant encouragement from that. But if he digs in and doesn't return, then you have a whole new snowball that starts, because we're not talking about pre-season. We're not talking about friendlies. We're not talking about tours. We're talking about the Premier League, the greatest league in the world, where the best and most prolific striker, other than perhaps Mo Salah, based upon the last few seasons, is saying, I don't care if I'm a Newcastle United player, I'm simply not playing. And that's when the fan base will fall out with him. That's when the management will fall out with him. That's when the manager will fall out with him. And for me, that's the beginning of the end. So this Liverpool bid and then backing off is very much a test of how hard is Isak prepared to
go
push. And for me, that will define the next step in the saga.
Yep. Glock 9 here says, is Isak okay with not playing before the World Cup?
Another great point, and I think Newcastle will use that to their advantage too, that if they threaten Isak and say, look, you're just not getting your move, then Isak will have to think, okay, is this going to be detrimental? But I think what helps the player in all of this is if Alexander Isak is intent on forcing his way out and burning bridges, which is what he may have to do in the short term, he could do that right up until September the 3rd. And then on September the 4th, he could apologize, sign a new deal, and then still be playing for the vast majority of the season, which is why I think the World Cup won't play a massive influence in all of this.
Yeah, I agree with you. And listen, football fans are fickle. I remember twice United fans turning on Wayne Rooney over transfer requests. As soon as he plays the next first game and scores a goal, everybody was chanting Rooney, Rooney, Rooney again. And football fans are fickle. The same as Newcastle, Liverpool fans that turned on Trent have no problem really with what Isak's doing. Newcastle fans that are calling it out will have no problem in reality when Vissa is in their team if they sign him. So that's very true. Look, Ben, I know